Good evening. My name is John Mercer, and tonight I will be talking to you about my trip to Veracruz, Mexico with Hawk Mountain and ProNatura. ProNatura is a nonprofit organization that runs the two hawk watches in Veracruz, Mexico. In a way, it's similar to our Nature Conservancy. The proceeds from our trip went to help pay the accountants for their work. The trip was excellent. So good, I would like to find 10 people who would go with me next October to do the trip again. And just move the slide. All right. Well, upon arrival, the driver from ProNatura and our guide, Jorge, picked us up at the airport and took us to our first hotel, the Hotel Macambo, on the Gold Coast of Veracruz. The hotel was beautiful. However, it's what I would call a tired old grand dame. Once very beautiful, but showing her age. She was built in the 1920s, and the weather in this part of the world makes it very hard to keep a place in good condition. If you look closely, you can see missing parts of the ceiling, mold, and other signs of age on the stairs and the pool deck. One of the cool aspects, where if you are familiar with the works of M.C. Escher, you would feel that you were in one of his works of art, with the arches and the various levels. The hotel had many levels and stairs everywhere that were not a standard rise and run like our stairs. One thing about Mexico, it must not be a very litigious society because they had lots of little tiny steps and other things to trip over. After settling in, I headed to the beach and looked back at the hotel. Not that large structure, modern structure, which I was told was empty, but the low structure behind the banos or bathroom to us non-Spanish speakers. Needless to say, as soon as I set out, I started taking pictures of birds. A very common and totally unafraid bird is the great-tailed grackle. They were everywhere and close, so it's hard to stop taking pictures of them. Here, a male with a glossy black coat, very similar to our boat-tailed grackle, except for the pale iris. Monk parakeets, also known as Quaker parrots, were flying around making a lot of noise, but some eventually landed in the tree so I could get pictures. Monk parakeets are native to Argentina, but there are a few places that have feral populations like southern Florida, and needless to say, Veracruz, Mexico, with sightings in eBird as far north as Portland, Maine, and Ottawa, Canada. Royal tern with a white forehead of its winter plumage flew by. This picture nicely shows the dark area on the wing that differentiates it from the Caspian tern, which has a much larger dark area on the underwing. Another shot of the royal tern showing the orangish red bill and the top and underside of the wing. It is interesting to note that the royal tern in non-breeding plumage has a larger dark area on top of the wing, but a smaller area underneath, unlike the Caspian tern where the top and underside are similar sizes. Walking through the waves on the edge of the beach was a willet looking for food. Because it's fairly light and walking in deeper water, this is probably a western willet. A semi-palmated plover on the rocks. This bird is either in its winter plumage or a juvenile. The fact that you see edges on the feathers may make it a juvenile, but I'm no expert on shorebirds. The next morning, the group walked out to the beach. On our way to the beach, we discovered our first ferruginous pygmy owl. This was a challenging bird to get a picture of. It was difficult light because it was so dark. The sun wasn't even up yet. At the beach were a few shorebirds. We found a black-bellied plover in winter plumage. The black-bellied plover is a bird found in almost all continents of the world at some point in the year. And this winter coat gives it its European name, the gray plover. This willet up on the jetty may be an eastern willet subspecies. It is slightly darker. Apparently, the western willet will winter on the east coast, but the eastern willet does not move to the west coast, making it difficult to determine winter birds if they ever do split this species. A flyby of some brown pelicans gliding just above the water. They came by quite close to give me an opportunity to get some nice pictures. They're such graceful flyers, rarely flapping their wings, just using the lift over the waves. A male great-tailed grackle was feeding on the water. And I caught this guy with something in his beak, either a small clam or an egg. Nearby, a female great-tailed grackle was also feeding in the water. She too has something in her beak. These birds were found in every city and town we visited and were in large flocks and very noisy. Laughing gulls were numerous and used to people. The laughing gull is an East Coast bird until it migrates to Mexico, where it will spread to the West Coast and down both sides of South America. On the way back to the hotel, a Eurasian collared dove, an invasive from Asia, as the name suggests. Apparently, in 1974, less than 50 escaped captivity in Nassau, Bahamas, and started to spread into almost all of North America and Mexico. The first of many black vultures. They were very numerous, but not migrating. So they would catch your eyes and fool you into thinking they were migrating, but then they would change directions and go against the flow. Great kiskadees were also numerous and comfortable in the city settings. There are the three similar looking birds, the social flycatcher, the great kiskadee, and the boatbill flycatcher, differentiated by the size of their bills and their voices. The kiskadee is the middle-sized bird and it says its name, making it very easy to identify. A pair of Inca doves or Mexican doves up on the wire. Their population is mostly in Mexico, north to southern USA, and south to Costa Rica. Their name is a bit of a misnomer. They do not inhabit any area that was in the Incan Empire. A peregrine falcon was flying around overhead near the buildings, a lovely adult. Then all of a sudden there was a pair of peregrine falcons flying around. They started duking it out overhead, so I took this picture. A little far away, but fun. After our walk on the beach, we headed to our next hotel in Jose Cardel. On the way there, the driver stopped the bus and let us off to see our first kettle of hawks. We were out in a sugarcane field, and a man came by and cut up some sugarcane for us to taste. It was a pretty neat experience. They came a little closer, and you can see there's some adult broadwing hawks. Note the black and white tails. We were impressed by the size of the kettle, but had no idea what was coming up. Our next hotel is the Hotel Buenavito. I can't keep saying it wrong. Not the fanciest, but Jose Cardel isn't exactly a tourist hotspot. The room was simple but functional and very convenient to the hawk watch. Interestingly, one day as we were leaving, I forgot to get something from my room 203 and ran back up to my room, unlocked my door, stopped wondering, who put the bottle of Coke in my room? Until I realized I was in 103 and my key worked in both rooms. One of the people was in room 303, so I tried it there with their permission. It didn't work there. The hotel is convenient because the hawk watch in Cardel is right on top of the Hotel Buenavito. A great high spot to view hawks from and a real win-win for the hotel. The hotel's built-in patrons throughout the hawk watch season as tourists go by to see the hawk. The view looking out towards the coast, you can see it's right in the middle of the city, although I use that term loosely. The population is less than 20,000 people. In the distance, you can see the mountain range that makes this area so special. This is a spur off the Sierra Madres of Oriental, which reaches almost to the coast, forcing hawks into a small gap between the mountains and the coast, funneling them right over Cardel and Chichicaxtli. This map of the mountain range in Mexico may display this better. I will zoom into this area. This is the spur I was talking about. Jose Cardel is here, and Chichicaxtli about here, just east of Pico de Orizaba. So if you look towards the west from Jose Cardel, you can see the highest point in Mexico. It looks like one of the clouds, but it is a snow-covered volcano. After a quick lunch, I ran up to the roof. The counters were not very busy, so I pointed out a few birds to the right. Then I saw a kettle way off to the left. The counters looked, said thank you, went over to the desk, and picked up his clicker. Apparently, I caught the start of the day's kettles. This was our first view of the River of Raptors, turkey vultures low and hawks above. I found it interesting that they tended to separate into layers like that. Obviously, this is just a small part of the sky. The river went on for miles. After the first group passed, another kettle formed. It turned into a very nice hour or two. One thing I did not expect was to have other types of birds like these white pelicans using the same river as they migrated. I guess I should have, but I was quite surprised and delighted. The birds were far away except for this rock pigeon on the roof, apparently near its nest because Amy put in eBird as being on nest. Later that day, we went to Chichicaxtli to the hawk watch there. The hawk watch is in a small village near school. and they do a lot to help the village and teach the children about how special their village is. One day while we were there, I watched as an educator from the Hawk Watch led the children's. First, they ran in circles. They ran across the soccer field. Then they ran in circles again. They did it over and over several times. I wondered what's going on until we realized they were kettling and migrating. This was the board with the count for the season. Mississippi kites and broadwings are mostly through, but still coming, with Swainston scheduled to come through while we were there, and the bulk of the turkey vultures to follow a week or two later. The value of these two sites is that almost all U.S. broadwings and Swainston hawks pass through, giving the most accurate count of how those two populations are doing. This is the season's data pulled up from hawkcount.org for Chichikoxley. You can see they had 1,803,049 birds. If you were observant, you may have noticed the previous slide, they only, by October 7th, they had over 1 million broadwings. But here, for the season, only 700,000. I think the previous slide must be a combination of the two hawk watches. So here's the count from Cardell for the season. Add these two up, they had about 1,700,000 turkey vultures, 1,600,000 broadwing hawks, about 500 Swainston's hawks, a total count of over 4,300,000 birds. Pretty impressive. Here's the overall view of the Hawk Watch at Chichikoxley. Counters on the top, visitors below. I walked around looking for local birds to get pictures. Having never been in this part of the world, I needed some live birds. Walking around, I found a blue-gray tanager, wanted to add to my eBird life list. I had seen them in Costa Rica before my eBird days, and I did not have it on my eBird list or any pictures, so I was excited to get this. A yellow-winged tanager, very similar to the blue-gray tanager, except for the yellow on his wing. This one's fairly close for nice pictures. Nothing new, but Baltimore Orioles passed through this area. We saw several of them on the trip, plus several other species of orioles, as you will see later. Clay-colored thrush, another Costa Rica bird I needed for my list. This bird was very close and in nice light, so it was really hard to choose just one picture. The clay-colored thrush is the national bird of Costa Rica. Go figure. All the fantastic birds they have there, and they picked this plain Jane as their national bird. A melodious blackbird who has a noisy and, to me, not very melodious song. It is resident in eastern Mexico, and its population is spreading south, reaching Costa Rica in 1989 and expected in Panama soon. If you stopped looking at passerines and looked up, broadwing hawks were passing over fairly low. Also, a vanguard of the Swainston's hawks was passing through. The Swainston's at the top and the two broadwings at the bottom, so you can get a good comparison of the difference between the two species. Another migrant that caught me by surprise were the wood storks. Life birds for me. I didn't know there were that many in the world. We must have seen thousands of them while we were there. A red-billed pigeon popped into the trees near the watch. Their territory is from extreme southern Texas to Costa Rica, with most of the population in Mexico. Interestingly, they are rare in this area in the winter. This buff-bellied hummingbird kept me busy. It was frequently visiting this plant, but would not hold still long enough for pictures. Finally, I got this shot. A cinnamon-bellied saltator was skulking about in the trees, another lifer for me. This one was yelling about something. Maybe all the hawks flying overhead. Below the many higher migrating hawks, a closer American kestrel flew by, probably a local. This is a male. You can tell by the spotting on the breast and the white lights at the trailing edge of the wing. Also, it was a dark-faced juvenile short-tailed hawk, also most likely a local and not migrating. You can tell this is a juvenile by the banding on the tail. In an adult, the bands are larger and black and white. October 8th, we get up early for a 5:45 breakfast so we can get out to the Miramar Park to get the early birds. A pretty location with lots of birds. Apparently this was once a ranch or a tree nursery, but is now an eco-tourist park attracting birders. As I will do, I wandered off from the group because I thought I heard something, but instead of getting birds, a donkey decided to be my friend. Sally O'Byrne sent me this picture she took. He hung around the group while we birded the area. Our leader, Jorge, on the left, warned us that the donkey is friendly, but do not get behind it. It will kick anyone who gets behind it. Some of the birds we found were olive-throated parakeets. Some are lobbying to split this species with this subspecies being the Aztec parakeet. The nominated subspecies is restricted to Jamaica. A very close ferruginous pygmy owl. We had quite a few of them, but this was the most photogenic of the ones we saw, usually in dark locations and tough to photograph. Jorge and Amy would use the call of this bird, somewhat similar to our saw-whet owls, to attract other birds. A gray hawk flew by. Gray hawks are local birds for this area and can be found up into Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico, and down into northern Costa Rica. It used to be called the Mexican goshawk, but chromosomal matching in 2013 put this in the Buteo family, so it changed its name to the gray hawk. A northern beardless tyrannulet was in a tree. I'd seen this bird in Texas, but this was much closer. Unfortunately, lighting isn't great, with the bird being mostly backlit. This bird is in the flycatcher family and is slightly smaller than our epidnax flycatchers. In the distance, some groove-bill ani, a type of cuckoo. But unlike the cuckoos of Europe, they do not parasitize nests, or like our cuckoos, build a nest and lay eggs in it. Instead, they lay their eggs in communal nests, and all of the community helps incubate the eggs. Also distant, an Altamira oriole, the largest orange and black oriole found in the U.S., albeit rarely found. It is similar to the hooded oriole, but differentiated by the orange median covert versus white for the hooded. Several Montezuma oropendulas were around. They are actually in the oriole family and build hanging nests like the Baltimore oriole, but much longer and larger. One finally flew by for nice photos. I couldn't resist taking pictures and couldn't decide which were the best, so you get 3 pictures of it flying by. These are large birds, at least as large as an American crow and sometimes even larger. Much prettier though, and had a fascinating song. We did have other things beyond birds like butterflies. Here, a cracker butterfly with really cool patterns, which is very good camouflage, especially on the bark of a tree or on a fence post like this one. After Miramar, we went to an archaeological site, Cuyahuitzlan. Summarizing this sign, this was a Totonac site from before 800 AD. They were conquered by the Toltecs in 900, and again by the Aztecs in 1300. This is near where Hernando Cortez landed, and the Totonacs allied with the Spanish and facilitated their conquest of Mexico. The ruins are watched over by this large rock, and most of us were speculating that rock climbers must flock to this location to climb that rock. Looking for information on rock climbing in Veracruz, I could not find this location, so they probably do not use this rock for rock climbing. The ruins had lots of low walls or ruins of foundations of stone houses, and they had these tiny mausoleums where they buried the priests and kings and other high-station persons. Apparently, they left the bodies out until they were just bones. Then they took the bones apart and put the bones in these little structures. I'm not sure what these large stone structures were for, but very interesting. It was a beautiful site with a grand view of the Gulf of Mexico and is apparently one of the least frequently visited archaeological sites in Mexico. In amongst the ruins, I found this rose-bellied lizard. It can reach 5 inches long if it grows its tail to full length and doesn't lose its tail. It is endemic to Mexico and really cute. There were also birds to be seen, like another dark-phased juvenile short-tailed hawk, unfortunately not close. But a light-phased adult short-tailed hawk showed up, so I put the 2 pictures side by side to give us a good look at the difference between the dark and light-phased birds. From Cuyahuitzlan, we went to La Antigua, where Hernando Cortez set up his settlement. Here they built the Hermitage of the Rosary, the first church in the New World. We were there near a religious holiday, thus all dependence. This church was originally built in 1524, and the rear portion was added in 1550 and is still in use today. It is very well maintained. The sign on the wall shows how the area was set up back then. The church on the left, Cortez's house in the middle, with easy access to the river. Needless to say, Cortez's house was not well maintained, and is in ruins, but the ruins are being preserved. Note how the one wall is propped up with boards. This large ficus tree is climbing up the wall and holding this wall up. If this tree were not here, that wall would have been destroyed by a hurricane a couple of years ago. It was interesting to note the materials used. They used local stone, brick ballast from the ship, and coral from the reefs to build the walls. A very pretty sign outside the house indicates the house was built in 1519. Unfortunately, like many of the signs in the area, only in Spanish. Menus, too, were often only in Spanish, which made ordering food an adventure, but one I thoroughly enjoyed and had some interesting meals. At La Antigua, we pre-ordered our dinner at this restaurant, coconut-encrusted shrimp for me. After dinner, Jorge and Amy treated us to ice cream. We had a choice of coconut, mango, or mamey. I've never heard of mamey. I had to try it. It was delicious. Before dinner, we went for a boat ride to find some birds. We had 2 little boats, and my group let me sit in the front seat since I had the camera. I am glad they did. We found birds. As is common on boat rides, the boat allows you to get pretty close to the birds. I guess they don't see it as a threat. Here, a snowy egret with its yellow feet and yellow lures. In the trees, a group of moorlet seed eaters recently split from the white-collared seed eaters. We had tried to get white-collared seed eaters when I was in Texas, but missed. The moorlets is common in Mexico. A great egret flying away. Unlike most of the other birds, the great egrets seem to be shy with the boats. The background kind of gives a feel for how dark it was in the trees. Thank goodness this is a white bird. Social flycatcher and photobombing the picture is a blue-gray tanager, which had to be added to the eBird list for the day since the camera is the only one that caught it. The social flycatcher is the smallest bill of the 3 that includes the great kiskadee and boat-billed flycatcher. So I put them all together on this slide to show how similar they look. The social has the smallest bill, the great kiskadee has a larger bill, and the boat bill has a very stout bill. Unfortunately, I really didn't get a decent photograph of the boat bill. Hopefully, you can see the difference. Neotropical cormorants were everywhere. Here, one in flight. They're slightly smaller than our double-crested cormorant and had a longer tail. The 2 can be easily confused. Sitting on a post in the river, it's easier to see some of the field marks, like the grayish bill with dark lures, a smaller orange chin patch, and the whitish V-shaped border on the chin patch. As I said before, the great egrets seem to be spooked easily as we approach. Maybe it's just a coincidence, but it was something I noticed. This is a really pretty bird against that dark background. A highlight, an Amazon kingfisher, which eventually came out where I could get a decent picture. With the name Amazon, you would think it was large, but it's about the same size. They're only slightly larger than our belted kingfisher. This is a male. The females have a green band on their chest. We also had belted kingfishers. There were several belted kingfishers along this river. The boat seemed to be a great help in getting close to belted kingfishers. A side view of the male belted kingfisher. This was fun. I usually don't get this close to kingfishers. Hiding in the tree, an adult yellow-crowned night heron. Quite difficult to get a picture of, despite the fact that we can get pretty close. Always some part of it was hiding behind a branch. Great blue herons were plentiful. In the summer, they can be found only near the coast. But as the northern migrants arrive, they can be found near any body of water in Mexico. Another snowy egret. This one looked like someone had rubbed it the wrong way, or like a 3-year-old child's well-used stuffed toy. A peregrine falcon flew over. Being at the front of the boat, I could take pictures overhead since I was not under the canopy and was the only one who really got to see the bird. A black vulture flew over again. Being at the front of the boat, I could get a picture. A group of blue-winged teal flew by. They were so fast it was questionable as what kind of ducks they were, but the camera cannot lie and prove they're blue-winged teals. Lacking the white crescents by the bill, I would guess they are all female or young. This great blue heron has a fish in its mouth. The fish has to be about 9 to 12 inches long, but very skinny, so I don't think I'll have any difficulty getting it down. A juvenile yellow-crowned night heron was on the bank. You can tell it's a yellow crown by the thin streaking and the dark bill with no yellow on it. A group of marble godwits flew by, low to the water. You can tell they're marble godwits by their buffy-colored cinnamon underwings and two-tone bills. Dowitchers this time of year would be gray, and no other godwits are found in Mexico. In the distance, our first crested caracara. Note the white at the four corners, which is diagnostic for the crested caracara, the only caracara north of Costa Rica. A group of black-necked stilts with a smaller bird we really struggled to identify, but finally came to the agreement that it was a lesser yellowlegs. It appears that the group consists of 2 adults and 2 juvenile stilts, plus the yellowleg. White ibises were around, here an adult and a pair of juveniles working their way along the bank of the river, searching for food, but stopping to look at us as we go by. A pair of juveniles on the branch. Native American folklore says that the white ibis is the last bird to seek refuge before a hurricane, and the first to emerge afterwards. So they became symbols of danger and optimism. A flock of American avocet flew low over the water. The American avocet only winters along the coast of Central America. They go north to the pothole lakes of North America to breed. As we got closer to the Gulf, terns like this sandwich tern showed up. You can tell it's a sandwich tern because of the black bill with the yellow tip. Like its larger cousin, the royal tern, it loses its black head in its winter plumage. Then a Caspian tern showed up, showing the diagnostic, much larger dark area at the wingtip. If you recall, the royal tern had a narrow band of black on the tip of the wing, where the Caspian's is much larger and covers most of the tip of the wing. Our goal was to get out of the boats at this beach and prowl the beach looking for birds. But the winds were fierce, almost gale force, so one boat stopped on the beach, but then backed up and we got out of there before we were sandblasted. Next morning, now October 9, as ended up being the pattern every day, we got up early to go birding, this time at Juan Angel Beach, or Johnny Angel Beach to us gringos. Here we got to see the sun rise over the Gulf of Mexico. Like I said, we got up early every day, which meant I needed 2 lenses, one for dark times and the one that I prefer when there was plenty of light. The Gulf of Mexico is fairly rough as this pelican flew by. Somewhere off the coast, a hurricane was churning and we were worried that we might get hit, but we were spared. Once the sun came out, I could switch lenses and get better pictures. A pair of black-necked stilts flew by, both probably adults. I like the water droplets falling from the feet of the closer bird in this photograph. A small group of short-billed dowitchers, positively identified by their call notes. Unlike the earlier godwits, they are grayer and have white streaks down the center of the back, although, like the godwits, they do have bicolored bills. Sandwich terns were scooting just above the water, back and forth in this one area. This one didn't have a yellow tip, so one might think it was a common tern until you notice that the tail's not forked. This may be a juvenile. Finally, we got to see what the tern was up to. It was waiting for the fish to start jumping so it could catch its breakfast. This was a pretty fun show to watching them go after the small jumping fish. A spotted sandpiper in winter plumage was walking along the banks close to the vegetation, always hidden from me, and finally showed itself long enough for me to get a picture, then disappeared again. A greater yellowlegs with a dowitcher. Even without trying to gauge the bill length to the size of the head, you know this is a greater yellowlegs just by its size compared to the dowitcher. A lesser would be about the same size as the dowitcher. After walking the beach, we walked inland amongst the dunes and found a ruby-throated hummingbird. Fortunately, Amy really knew her birds and was a huge help in getting the various birds identified. This is a subspecies of the rufous-naped wren. This subspecies may be split off and become the Veracruz wren. Most of the world does recognize this as separate subspecies, but the AOU does not, much to the annoyance of the locals. One of the differences between this bird and the standard is that this bird has a speckled breast and the other 2 subspecies have clear breasts. This guy is very close and very photogenic, so I got several nice pictures. A lark sparrow, a life bird that I would not travel 1/4 mile to see back in 1990 when one was in Delaware, right on my way home from work. People kept telling me, go see it, but I waited about a month and finally went only to hear that it had left 3 days earlier. I am not a twitcher. They will come to me eventually. A flock of white ibis flew by, mostly juvenile, 4 or 5 adults near the bottom. This area is noted for the Aplomado falcon, and we were fortunate to have one put on a show for us. It sat in a tree for a while, zoomed around at least somewhat close for a picture, then left us to park itself in a tree near those people who did not walk out to the dunes with us, so they could get a look. A much closer adult zone-tail hawk flew over, showing its black and white tail that gives it its name. Earlier you saw a juvenile with a thinly striped tail. The adult has a large, obviously black and white tail. A northern harrier popped up, hunting the scrublands. We had northern harriers in almost all of the areas that had a lot of grass. I guess that shouldn't have been a surprise. When it banked, you could tell it was a juvenile, not a female, by its pumpkin-colored belly. The female would have had a whitish belly. Also in this area was a second species of wren, the banded back wren. Note the clear belly, no spots or streaking, whitish near the neck, orangish on the belly. Unfortunately, you cannot see the banding on the back. It is similar to that of a red-bellied woodpecker. Speaking of woodpeckers, a golden-fronted woodpecker was nice and close for a picture. They were the most common woodpeckers we saw on the trip. Very similar to the red belly, but with a golden patch at the base of the bill and the goldish nape of the neck. That evening, we went to our next hotel, the Hotel Casabella in Coatepec. This hotel had the most interesting room, so I had to take pictures. Mine was a 2-story room with a living room on the first floor, a bedroom on the second-story balcony, the view down the stairs towards the bathroom at the bottom of the stairs. I was worried about having to get up in the middle of the night and falling down the stairs, but fortunately did not have any problem. The bathroom was really neat with a natural stone wall. There was a courtyard in the middle where we met and did some birding, where I got this azure-crowned hummingbird. There were other birds in the little courtyard, but by the time I ran back and got my camera, this was the only one that's left. Still pretty nice. October 10, we were heading out to a rainforest and then to a desert. Unfortunately, there's rain in the rainforest. Go figure. I was able to get this really poor picture of a red warbler, which shows its identifying mark, that big white cheek patch. Because there was rain in the rainforest and conditions were bad, we headed for the desert area. It was so damp this day, we even had a rainbow in the desert. However, no complaints. The original forecast before we left indicated we'd have rain from Monday the 10th through Saturday the 14th when we were to leave, and that a hurricane might hit us. A little bit of rain this morning, and then one other day, and every other day was sunny. We were lucky. The hurricane turned south and hit the Yucatan as we were leaving. The landscape was fascinating with Joshua trees and other desert-loving plants. In this environment, we have birds like the white-eared hummingbird. It's hard to see, but has a large curved white stripe right where the ear should be, hence the name. An olive warbler was bebopping around the bushes and stopped to wipe its bill off on a branch. Note the large white eye ring and the yellow face. Then it turned to give me a front view. This is an adult female or a first-year male. The adult male has a mask, like our common yellowthroat, and the juvenile female is not this brightly colored. Not the greatest picture of a gray flycatcher, but this was only the second time this bird had ever been reported in this area. So Amy, who is the eBird coordinator for Veracruz, was very excited to see it. So I took this picture for her. Generally, they winter in Baja, Mexico. A young peregrine falcon flew by, quieting the birds down for a few minutes. And this rocky, dry area gave us some new species for the trip, such as this canyon towhee. This bird is a young bird, midway between juvenile plumage and adult plumage. Still some streaking, and the central spot isn't very pronounced yet. The angle of the picture makes this bill look crooked, but it isn't really crooked. It does. And a curved-billed thrasher. They often compete vigorously with the canyon wren for nest sites, with the two species sometimes destroying the nest of the other. Sadly, because of predation, the curved-billed thrasher's fledging rate is only about 20%. October 11, we meet Ernesto, and he takes us around Macotepetl Ecological Park. The park is on a hill in the middle of Jalapa and a very popular walking place for the townspeople. You can see from this view how high it is over the city. Jorge describes the park as an egg yolk standing over the egg white of the city. This park is one of the areas the four guys who started the Hawk Watch used to bird when they were students in the university. When first starting to determine where to watch, one of the four locations tried was this tower. However, it was not deemed to be better than the other locations, so there's no Hawk Watch there now. Many of you know Lori Goodrich from Hawk Mountain. Next to her are Jorge and Amy, our trip leaders, and Ernesto is on the right. Ernesto and Jorge were two of the four guys who, quote, discovered, unquote, the River of Raptors. And now Ernesto is a professor at the university. Not a great picture, but we spotted an uncooperative McGilvery's warbler and had to get a picture. The split eye ring really jumps out at you in this picture, assuming you can find the bird. An interesting mass on the ground turned out to be sawfly larvae. The sawfly is in the same family as ants, bees, and wasps, but does not have a waist or a stinger. Its name comes from the saw-shaped ovipositor the female uses to cut into a plant to insert its eggs. This park had a little archaeological site with some statues and some graves. But we're here for birds like this blue-crowned mahmot who came out for just a second. This was a cloudy day, so the photography was tricky. While we were here, it started to rain. Fortunately, we were next to the museum that was being refurbished, and we could sit on the porch and out of the rain and watch the birds like this Wilson's warbler. While sitting there, a male Bullock's oriole popped out. You can tell it's a Bullock's by the eye line. This is the only oriole that has an eye line. Unfortunately, it did not come any closer. Also far away, this female rose-breasted grosbeak, and I was the only one to see. I guess the others did not hear me call it out. After the rain and high in the trees in poor light was this slate-throated redstart, which would not stop moving, so it was tough to get any pictures. After the park, Ernesto took us to an anthropology museum, a museum of the past cultures. Interestingly, as you went back in time, the museum dropped in level and widened. Here you can see the level drop I mentioned. The statue is called El Señor de las Limas, after the farm it was discovered in. Apparently, the children in this area for generations had used a nice flat rock to crack nuts on. Since it was jade and pretty, one generation decided they wanted to keep it, so they started excavating, and it turned out to be the top of this guy's head. And once they exposed the face, they were frightened and ran away to tell the adults, who finished the excavating. In almost all of the statues, the people are grimacing, except for a few, like the child in its lap. Those that are smiling are all children who have Down syndrome or other deformities. Unlike most cultures where those kinds of children would be abandoned, these children are revered. After the museum, we stopped off at Chichicoxtli for a little while, where I got a nice picture of Eurasian collared dove. Then is off to our next hotel, the Hotel Puente Nacional, a very fancy spa that is modern and empty. It seemed that we and another group from ProNatura were the only people in the whole hotel. The view from the dining room was beautiful, and we were able to bird from the tables if you so inclined and had your binoculars with you. While eating, a flock of wood storks flew over, so I went over and pointed them out to the other group. October 12th, after another early breakfast, we headed to the Mueller coffee plantation, where we were greeted by a beautiful rainbow. It stayed around long enough for me to get a phone picture and this close-up with my camera. Jorge Mueller is a sixth-generation transplant from Germany, and he runs the plantation and is grooming his daughter, in the light blue on the right, to take over the operation when he retires. The plantation is a shade-grown coffee plantation, and this plantation is the gold standard for shade-grown coffee plantation and is the one used as an example of how to do it correctly. There are 5 grades of shade-grown coffee. This is known as rustic. It is called rustic because the coffee plants are interspersed with other native plants, which provide 70 to 100% shade. The next level is traditional polyculture. The plants get 60 to 90% shade, but the trees are usually fruit, medicinal, or fuel trees, not necessarily natives. Commercial polyculture has 30 to 60% shade, but the shade trees are specifically planted and are fruit or fuel trees. The next level is shade monoculture, where the trees provide only 10 to 30% shade, and there's only 1 or 2 species of trees on the field. And finally, there's a full sun, and that is obvious, but also the most common, coffee. As with all coffee harvesting, it is done completely by hand because the berries ripen at different times. A very good picker is able to pick 50 kilos per day at 5 pesos per kilo, or about $13 a day. As we walked the plantation, leafcutter ants were crossing the trail. It is interesting to note they cleared out a path for themselves, all the little rocks and litters removed to make their trek easier. Some of the birds we found on the plantation included wedge-tailed saberwing, a hummingbird with 3-lobed tail, a pointy tail that gives it its name. This is probably a juvenile. The male should have a bright purple head, and the female a cinnamon wash on her belly. The most common hummingbird of the trip, the azure crown hummingbird, a bird of the area from Mexico to Nicaragua. This bird put on quite a show, flying from flower to flower, allowing him to get several poses. I barely caught this Couch's kingbird as it dove into the tree. You can only tell them from tropical kingbirds by the call. And Amy told me she heard no tropicals calling in this area, only Couches. So for me, that makes this a Couch's kingbird. Hard to see Lesson's motmot hiding up near the crown of this palm tree. I'm told this was split from the blue crown motmot, where the major difference is that this bird has a black cap on his blue crown, whereas the blue crown motmot has all blue crown, no cap. A masked titria, a black and white bird with a distinctive pink mask surrounded by black. The masked titria is a cavity nester. A very difficult one to get pictures of, the ivory-billed woodcreeper. Amy could hear this bird off in the distance, and Jorge called until it came close enough to see. It didn't come very close and disappeared very quickly. A very cooperative and beautiful gartered trogon let me get a nice photograph of it. This bird was right over our heads and stayed in that spot until everyone had a very long look at it. This is a male. The female has a white belly and a gray head, not a purple head. There were also many butterflies, like this banded peacock butterfly. I thought I had more butterfly pictures, but for some reason, they did not come out well, usually out of focus. After the bird walk, Mr. Mueller in the red checkered shirt treated us to a coffee break with cookies and fabulous bread that his wife had made. You cannot buy his coffee here in the U.S., so many of us bought bags of coffee to take home with us. Needless to say, this coffee is an Arabica coffee and has the rustic designation. As we were leaving, a roadside hawk took flight. It had been sitting in a tree but was behind branches, and I was happy to have it finally fly off so I could get a picture. After lunch, we decided to head back to Chichicoxtli, since this was the day Swainson's hawks were supposed to appear. We got there around 2, and up until that time, they had about 18,000 birds go by. We got a close adult zone-tailed hawk. Again, notice the broad bands on the tail. My friend the buff-belly hummingbird was back, so as usual, I chased it around a while, taking pictures, and finally got an even better picture than the one I showed earlier. All of a sudden, the flight began. Kettles here, kettles there. Good luck counting this. Jorge told us how they do this. The main counter has 3 clickers, one for 5, one for 10, and one for 50. They try to find the beginning of the stream and determine which clicker to use. Obviously, 50 here. They count out how big a group of 50 is and then start clicking as they fly by, finally calling out the count when the group is by. But to make things even more challenging, you not only have several varieties of hawk, but also things like groups of anhingas migrating through. Below the river, a sharp-shinned hawk. Pulling back, you can see the skies full of birds, mostly Swainson's hawk. A late Mississippi kite with 2 black vultures. You can tell it's a Mississippi kite by the pointy wings, the fairly flat dark tail against a light body, and a white head. A low, light-phased, short-tailed hawk. This hawk is photobombing the Swainsons above, but just below it in the picture, a barn swallow is photobombing the short-tailed hawk. Note the forked tail. They must be at the same altitude because both are in focus. To add additional fun to the show, Off the side, a group of 4 roseate spoonbills tried to sneak by. Wood storks joined the parade, forming their own large kettles, then streaming out just like the raptors were doing. One group came quite close for decent pictures. A very distinctive bird. With the Swainsons, we spotted a rarity, an albino broadwing hawk. The 2 birds circled around each other, and we were able to get everyone in the group on them. Note the difference in structure between the Swainsons and the broadwing hawk, who has a shorter, stockier wings and a much shorter, broader tail. Then a bat falcon popped up and zoomed around the soccer field behind us. This guy was fast, and I had a hard time getting a decent picture. The light semicolor is diagnostic of the bat falcon. I caught this white-winged dove as it landed, displaying its wing stripes, and a second one flying by so you could see the full wing. A group of scrub euphonias were in a tree, 2 males and a female. As is usual, the male's more colorful with a yellow belly, yellow forehead, and dark blue back and face. A ladderback woodpecker showed up. The group had seen one earlier on the trip, and I'd missed it, so I was happy to have this one show up so I could get a picture. A group photo was taken up at the Hawk Watch at Chichicoxley to memorialize this day. By the time we left, the number had jumped from 18,000 to 103,000 migrants. After that wonderful day, we headed to our last hotel, the Fiesta Hotel, right on the coast. This was one of the fancier hotels, very nice. After the now traditional early breakfast, we headed out for birding at La Barrancas and walked along El Bayo Road. This was a savanna-type habitat with lots of birds like this hooded oriole. And of course, in this type of grassland, there has to be a northern harrier, another juvenile with a pumpkin-colored belly. A northern mockingbird was making mockingbird-type call notes, then popped up on the wire so I could get a picture. A crested caracara carrying what looks like nesting material. I don't think they're nesting at this time of year, but maybe. It is Mexico, and the weather isn't going to get very hot or very cold. A female vermilion flycatcher trying to blend in by standing in front of a red cattle pen. And then her beau, the male vermilion flycatcher. I tried and tried to get them in flight because he kept sallying out to catch a bug, but no luck. The camera wanted to focus on everything but him. A pair of black-bellied whistling ducks flew by. They were the only ones I saw on the whole trip. A distant limpkin. Unfortunately, many of the birds along this road were distant and in some cases ridiculously far away. How Jorge found and identified them is amazing. A perfect example is this pinnated bittern. Are you kidding me? It looks like a stump in the field. Another example, but one even I could see and identify, was this white-tailed kite. We saw it several times, but it never came closer. I must have 10 pictures, but nothing better than this. Same thing with the double-striped thick-knees. They're also way out there. Nope. We had many scissor-tail and fork-tail flycatchers. The white head on the scissors-tail is the major difference. The fork-tail flycatcher has a black head. They were lovely to watch fly, so acrobatic with that long tail streaming out behind them. And one of the highlights, the lesser yellow-faced vulture. We were lucky and it took off right in front of us, circled around quite close to us, and gave us some terrific photographic opportunities. A great-crowned yellowthroat appeared, giving nice shots. The tail on this bird looks very short, so it may be a first-year bird or possibly it lost it to a predator, or maybe it's just in mid-molt. Note how similar it is to our common yellowthroat, except these birds have a dingy gray mask, not a black mask like our males. A cute little common toady flycatcher with its oversized head on a small body. This bird is at the very top of its range. Generally, it ranges from southern Mexico down into South America. This green-breasted mango put on a show, hovering over the road, sticking out its tongue. Nah, 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 you can't catch me. Spinning to give us a left side view. You can see that there's a black streak going from the neck to the belly with white and brown as you go further out. The brown indicates that this is a juvenile. Then a front view. Note the black stripe down the center of the body. This is apparently a common feature of mangoes, at least the ones I looked up. A Philadelphia vireo was in a small tree. Somehow easier to ID there than they are here. It seems more yellow there. Our last morning, and I went to the beach at the Fiesta Hotel where you could see an island with a lighthouse that warned of a reef by the island. Of course, what else would I find but great-tailed grackle, the male strutting through the lawn of the hotel like he owned the place. A female staying on the rope barrier, totally unafraid of me with a big camera. And a female on the roof of a cabana on the beach just below the balcony of the hotel. Maybe because the hurricane is going by offshore, approaching the Yucatan, the birds like this magnificent frigate bird were close. This is a juvenile. The females would have a black head and a white belly, where the juvenile has a white head and white belly. The male is all dark below except for his red patch on his throat. A ruddy turnstone on a tiny stretch of beach, wandering through the water trying to find something to eat. And the last bird of the trip, an osprey. Again, pretty close. Looking back from the plane, you can see Rio La Antigua, where Hernando Cortez first landed in the New World. From eBird, I was able to pull this map of the locations we birded just for the fun of it. I'm going to cycle through the various stops so you can see how we covered the area. We landed in Veracruz and went to the Hotel Macombo, and I walked the beach. We walked the beach, then headed to Jose Cardel, stopping at the sugarcane field for our first kettle. We stopped at the Hotel Buenavida for a drop off our luggage, then visit the Hawk Watch and have lunch. After lunch, it was off to Chichicatzli. Back to the Hotel Buenavida for the night. The Miramar Ranch is where the donkey adopted me. The under-visited archaeological site, Jose Cardel for lunch, La Antigua for where Cortez landed, and we had the river cruise. Hotel Buenavida for the night. Sunrise at Juan Angel Beach. Back to Jose Cardel for lunch. Let's see what's happening at Chichicatzli. Moved to the new hotel, Hotel Casabella, in the 2-story room. We birded the rainforest for about an hour and gave up, too wet. So up to the desert area for drier conditions. Spent the night at the Hotel Casabella. Went to the park in the center of Jalapa and then the museum. Stopped off at Chichicatzli to see more migrating hawks. That night, the spa hotel, the Hotel Puente Nacional. The next morning, the coffee plantation. Things are supposed to start hopping at Chichicatzli, and we had a great afternoon. Our last hotel, the Fiesta Hotel. Early morning birding at Savannah and La Barrancas. Back to the Fiesta Hotel for our last night. And this was my final tally. A great trip. Of over 200 birds seen or heard by the group, I had 189 that I was willing to count. Of those, 59 were eBird life birds. I photographed 151 species, of which 69 were life pictures. And like I said in the beginning, I would like to find 10 people who would like to go with me next October so I can experience this again. I would like to thank Hawk Mountain, ProNatura, and other members of the trip who shared pictures and memories with me. Also, Amy McAndrews, Sibley's, the birding field guides for Costa Rica, and Wikipedia for the help in identification and development of the fun facts I threw out there. Thank you for listening.